name is Lynn and I'm studying to become a B.C.B.A. In today's video, we're going to cover the last unit of the ethics class that I took, which is Unit 3. Unit 3 discusses the ethical responsibility of a behavior analyst to colleagues and general public statements of ABA. So basically, in the code, it covers section 7 and 8. The first thing code 7 talks about, or section 7 of the code talks about, is promoting ethical culture. So basically, we want to show that we are taking things from scientific evidence. Culture itself is selected via what they call meta contingencies. So basically, a meta contingency is anytime there is a contingency that's maintained by two or more people, whether or not you know them. So it's basically what's expected of you and your behavior within the community or society that you were serving. So we want to make sure that we are always promoting an ethical culture within ABA. Section 7 also is titled Behavior Analysts' Ethical Responsibility to Colleagues Within Fields and in Other Fields. So within the field, we want to make sure that we are maintaining each other, right? We have to be somewhat self-policing because, once again, we do have a hard past. So we want to make sure that we are addressing that and not falling back into those things. We're not just giving cookie cutter ideas to every time we see aggression. We're not just giving a out-of-the-box support plan for every instance of self-injurious behavior. We want to make sure that we're actually doing things scientifically and soundly and technologically sound and conceptually systematic, right? That being said, it also includes and in other fields, which means we are respecting the people who we work with, the other educators, the occupational therapists, the speech therapists, things of that nature. They are the experts of their field. We have no right to tell them that they're wrong on that end. Right? So for instance, within ABA, or at least within my own company, one of our directors was not a B.C.B.A, but an MFT. She could write things like, Johnny was feeling sad today, because that's her field of expertise. I, as a behaviorist, cannot write that in my notes, but she is 100% allowed to do so. Whether or not that translates within reports is a whole other matter. But the fact is that that is her expertise. That is her field. That is her scope. And no amount of whinging because of behavior analysis knowledge is going to change that. So we need to respect people of other fields, especially if they're working in tandem with ours. It also discusses conflicting codes. So because people from other fields exist, right, they also have their own set of ethics. And for instance, right, if someone is writing, little Ronnie's feeling sad today, we're not going to try and fight that, but we do have to be very ready to defend our actions by providing our evidence and our code. So for instance, the greatest example of this is gift giving. So for Christmas, people are going to try and give you gifts and we have to decline, not because we don't want them, because that's very kind, but we have to follow and show our code. We have to defend our actions with our code and or with any scientific evidence that we have. If someone says like, I don't think token economies work. Token economies are just ways to spoil kids. And it's like, well, actually we have this, which is why we want to try. So you have to be able, willing, and ready to defend any and all actions, be them good, like gift giving, or kind of conflictive, like whether or not to implement a specific plan that others would deem unnecessary or whatever they feel like it is, right? The next part is 7.02, which is ethical violation by others and risk of harm. So this is self-policing and assessment of risk of harm. So basically, if you hear something happening, if you see something happening, if it is 1 degree removed, basically you're not doing it, but you are witness to it, or you hear of it, which is a 2nd degree of removal, then you have to consider risk of harm. Is this going to hurt the kid? Is this going to hurt the person that is influencing, so to speak, or coming in contact with? And we need to be able to understand the steps to do so, or the steps of not doing anything at all if there's not anything really worth looking into, right? So if you heard that someone else did something, I mean, that's kind of hearsay. You need to be able to witness that. Now, if you're not in regular contact with that 2nd degree person, there's not much you can really do, right? Like, you can try to look into it, but the best way that they describe it is the person who's gossiping this to you, so to speak, you need to tell them what to do. Like, okay, if that's a huge ethical issue, you might want to bring it up to the board. Like, make sure you record everything. Everything that happens in ABA should also be recorded. Anytime we are doing anything, we are recording it. Why? Because we're taking data. Once again, if you're not taking data, you're not doing ABA. So everything needs to be recorded. Even all of the confounding or extraneous variables that are in the environment should be recorded so that we have a large breadth of data that we can pull from and understand what's happening and where and why. Always document all actions. We never backdate. So if you get updated information, you don't say, oh, that happened 2 weeks ago, I'm just going to date this 2 weeks ago really fast. You say, no, addendum or edit, learned or recorded or reported on today's date that 2 weeks ago this happened on this date and at this time. So you never backdate, because everything you write can be used in a court of law. That's something to be very seriously considered, is all your daily reports, your BIPs, which is behavior intervention plans, anything you write can be used as an official document in the court of law. So you have to take it very seriously. You have to be as objective as possible, and you need to write down when things happen. You were told that this happened 3 weeks ago on this day. So you write down, I was told on Friday that Jimmy hit Sally on Monday. So you're not going to backdate that to Monday. You have to write that down on Friday and say, like, this is what happened then. You need to time everything and write everything out. There is a whole section discussing the encompassed formal reporting of violation to the B.C.B.A. They tell you kind of how to do it and what steps to take within that. Of course, you can take the class when you want to learn those steps, because there's a lot to process. There's a big decision tree, so to speak. The next section that Unit 3 discusses, and the last section, so to speak, that it discusses is public statements. So that is Section 8 of the Ethics Code. Section 8.01 describes avoiding false or deceptive statements. For instance, don't advertise non-behavior analyst services as behavior analysis, right? So you're not going to say like, oh, I heard of this great diet that you can try, and I'm a behavior analyst, so you can trust me. Like, that's not realistic. It's very unethical to do so. 8.02 talks about intellectual property. We give everyone their credit where credit is due, right? So I heard recently from one of my co-instructors that every report you write and every behavior intervention plan you write should realistically have a reference section at the very end, even though it's not an article. There are so many things that we're pulling our data from. There's so many articles out there that are discussing the data that we should realistically be putting down the references of what we're discussing in that section. So like R.B.T is to provide alternate behavior. Well, there are so many studies done showing that how providing alternative behavior to problematic behavior and maintaining those instances will actually reduce problematic behavior. So we should realistically be referencing those studies when we write that out in our behavior intervention plan. So that's what they're talking about, intellectual property. We always do attribution. 8.03 talks about statements by others, which basically means correct errors, engage responsibly, don't try to pick a fight with people, but definitely try to present things in a fair and honest way. If you feel as though they are misrepresenting what we're doing, it's a very hard thing to do and engage on social media. So they always say, make sure that you are doing so respectfully and limit your engagement to just focusing on the concepts, right? Because it's very subjective otherwise. 8.04 discusses media presentation or media-based services. So this one's really interesting because it basically says, yes, and media presentation kind of goes hand in hand with the statements by others, but also media-based services. It's kind of a different take on media, because it's basically saying, consider your security. Like, I use an iPad to collect data. What if someone hacks into the iPad? Like, that's a huge breach of confidence, right? Because I have all the data of my clients in there. So that's a huge risk in ethics. So you need to take reasonable steps, right? So we're not sharing personal information on social media. And we also need to be aware that we need to have security protocols in place and we are respecting privacy, right? The last two bits are 8.05, which are testimonials and advertising. So we cannot solicit testimony of our current clients, because that would create a conflict of interest. Or so what if you ask, like, hey, Susan, you said I did a really good job with your kid. So can you, would you be willing to be a testimonial on the website? And she's afraid, oh gosh, I don't actually think they're doing that great of a job. If I give them bad testimony, are they going to stop services? So that's a huge conflict of interest right there, right? So as far as testimonials and advertising, you can do so with previous clients, but even then there's multiple steps to doing so and how to do it. The last section that they cover is 8.06, which is in-person solicitation. Basically, never do that. Never engage or solicit business uninvited, right? So if you're seeing like a kid exhibiting a tantrum that's very textbook, oh, they're doing this for access to tangible, you don't go up to the mom and say hey, here's my business card, you might need my help. No, That's 100% unethical. You can't do that. Don't directly market yourself, right? You have to let people come to you. So if someone's just like, oh, you know, like I heard you're you know, a B.C.B.A. Can you help me with my kid? Direct them to the correct channels on how to receive help. You don't say like, oh yeah, I can totally do that. No, it's like, oh, okay, well, like, what does your insurance cover? Like, can you go through your insurance and ask them to do a formal assessment, and then they would be able to work with the companies that provide services. You have to direct them in that way. We are not here to promote ourselves as like the only ones who can do it. So that was all of Unit 3. It was pretty bite-sized compared to Unit 1 and 2, but it still covered a lot of different aspects of ethics that I think are pretty important. Overall, I felt like this entire class was fairly easy, cut and dry, to the point. All the examples that they provided, some of them were pretty horrifying, right? Not gonna lie. It is ethics, and you will see the bad things that have happened, but you'll also see the really intricate ways of how to delegate, how to work around things when they come up. So it's definitely worth a solid 3 weeks of focus. So I really do appreciate their focusing on it. Hopefully that helps you guys. If you take this class, let me know if it was the hardest or if it was the easiest. For me, it was very much run of the mill. I don't feel like it was very hard. I don't feel like it was very easy. It just felt like it's interpretation, which is, once again, the most subjective part of ABA is going to be ethics, because we're being subject to either accepting a glass of water or not. So until the next video, I will see you.